Hello survivors and welcome to First Aid Spray, a Resident Evil podcast by fans for fans. This is episode 68 and in this edition we head back to the local distributor of niche magazines as we return to Comic Club, this time taking a look at the 4-issue original WildStorm story of Resident Evil Fire and Ice. My name is Cy and joining me on the panel this week, we say Fire and Ice, he says Thundaga. From Firebutton Games, it's Steve Valance.
Bolt 3, actually, just to be a contrarian. Hi, everybody.
Do you know what? I genuinely thought about it. If he was in Stars, he'd have an over-the-top Midlands accent and wear a flat cap just to make sure you get it. It's Moist Owlet, aka James.
Hello, everybody. Also, by the way, just so everybody knows, this comic did it before Aliens did. And I'll explain more later.
Okay. And just today he expressed high positivity regarding the state of Resident Evil after his experience with Remake 4. We'll see how that fares after this episode. From Steamforged Games, it's Sherwin Matthews.
Yes.
Every episode of First Aid Spray is recorded live on our Discord server, so join now to hear the show early and unedited and to become part of our fantastic little community where we discuss life, the universe, and Resident Evil. You can find a link to the server as well as all of our social media profiles at our website, faspraypod.com. It's the support of our listeners that keeps First Aid Spray going, so why not check out our merchandise or our Patreon page. Tiers begin at just $1 a month. Head over to patreon.com/faspraypod for a full list and the chance to create bonus First Aid Spray content. Shout out to our latest Patreon. Thank you to Shotgun Sinner X5. Shotgun with a 5. Sinner with a 5X. You know who you are. Thank you to you. Thank you to all of our patrons, of course, for continuing to support First Aid Spray. In the last few weeks, we've put out quite a bit of content all across the board, really, which is always fun. Over on Patreon, our Mastermind tier backers have early access to the latest episode of Tier Death Experience, where we ranked every outfit of Claire Redfield's wardrobe in the ongoing series of that. And also, we've got a new show. We sort of talked about it, we sort of teased it in the last episode, but now it's kind of more official. You'll have seen it in your podcast feed. A Moment of Relief, which is our little sideshow where we can talk for an hour or less about sort of whatever's interesting us at the time. Our first episode that is out to everyone, if you haven't listened to it yet, do go back and either listen to it on your podcast feed or you can find a video version of every episode of the show will be on YouTube. The first episode we talked about the games from 2023 that we're looking forward to. Meanwhile, the second episode is out now for Mastermind Patrons, where Steve, Berger and Kelsey discussed the state of the remakes and the remakes moving forward. Are we going to get an RE1, an RE5, so on and so forth. Nice, healthy discussion. Also, out on our YouTube is the latest episode of Now That's What I Call Survival Horror, my top 10 tracks from the soundtrack for Silent Hill 2. And to celebrate Alien Day, it's the same thing, James put together a video discussing the possibility if Umbrella became Weyland-Yutani. So go check that out as well. It's been a little while since we did an editorial thing, so it was always nice. That's a slew of stuff. Steve, take us into the news, would you kindly? I can't talk today.
Just because you asked so nicely. So our first piece of news, Resident Evil Death Island had a new trailer last month that got everyone talking. What do we think?
except us, apparently, because we forgot to include it. Yeah, James, how are you feeling about the Death Island, the new trailer? Because, it's not just... We knew that Leon, Chris and Jill were going to be in it, obviously, and there was reference to Rebecca being in it, and now Claire's in it as well. How do you feel about how Death Island appears to be shaping up as the Avengers of Resident Evil, as lots of people have christened it?
Yeah, a lot of people, I've been looking at a lot of videos today, and in the descriptions, people have been saying this is the successor to Vendetta and also Infinite Darkness and the comics as well, and it's so cool to see Rebecca again, and she's actually fighting, finally. She's actually a combatant, and we all know, well, most of us know that she can do it. She could do it. We've seen her in Resident Evil 0, and it's just great. There is one funny scene in the trailer where they try and do that Avengers slow-mo thing, and everyone else looks great, but Rebecca's kind of sliding on a one plane, she just looks really strange as she's sliding underneath this tentacle in that trailer. Am I excited for it? Only for Rebecca. because the CGI movies have not impressed me over the past 7 years. And like they just haven't really given me anything to get excited about. It's nice to see Rebecca a combatant, but I do think that when I watch it, I think there's going to be some soul that's not going to be in it for me. And I'm not normally like a naysayer. It's just there's going to be some soul that's in the games that isn't in the CGIs. And I've always felt that with the CGIs, they're missing something. Yeah, that's for another podcast, though.
Yeah, we haven't really covered too many of them. Obviously, we did Infinite Darkness last year before, whenever it came out. And I think the general consensus on that was a resounding meh at best. So it is very easy to get hardened shell about these CGI things. That being said, there is a small nostalgic part of me, and it's so pathetic to look at this like 10 years after the Avengers came out and go, look at them all standing together for the first time. That's kind of neat, but also, come on, for a random CGI movie is the first time this happens. It's a bit weird. Sherwin, how are you feeling about Death Island?
Where's Barry?
You're not wrong.
Yes.
That's it. That's all I've got to say. Where's Barry? I'll get excited when Barry turns up.
Do you know what? That's completely understandable. That would be, he's going to do an RE3 and turn up right at the end. Surely. Then it's not going to happen, is it?
Hey, Si, Sherry's going to go on the radio saying, on your left.
Oh, don't do me like this. Steve, how are you feeling about Death Island?
Yeah, pretty much echoing what everyone else is saying. Like, it's missing Sherry, it's missing Barry. I do hope for something akin to that. That would be fantastic. Although I get the feeling that's a little bit too. Are we optimistic there? Honestly, I'm kind of looking forward to it, and I'll tell you why. It's because compared to Infinite Darkness and Vendetta and all the other films, they've been straightforward in showing you there's going to be a lot of action set pieces, and we're getting actual dialogue as opposed to snippets of random nonsense. It feels like it's more coherently a better put together set of trailers. Although Villain Man, whose name I have no idea, just seems like we couldn't get Daniel Fabron, so we've got Daniel Fabron at home. Voiced by Crispin Freeman, no less, who already did a CGI villain in the first one, Degeneration. He was Frederick Downey. And obviously can't be the same guy. He's not got grey hair unless he's been hitting the Just for Men. Honestly, I don't get why we've got underwater liquors when we could have had gammas, but I'll take it. I'm actually kind of excited. Call me strangely optimistic. I think it's going to be dumb. I think it's not going to make much sense. But yeah, having the Resident Evil characters all meeting up, sans Ethan, for the first time will be kind of neat. That said, I kind of wish they'd all met up in a game first.
Yes, that is not... Yeah, that is something that I agree with, basically. It seems a little bit weird. Especially because, games can be as long as they need to be, whereas films, this is going to be like an hour and a half long, almost certainly. So everyone's going to be fighting for screen time, so all of the people on Twitter that already argue about who the best character is are going to have a field day with this thing. Not to mention that they have to share that screen time with a new villain, as you pointed out there. So, yeah, there's a lot of reasons to be sceptical, but, yeah, I guess we'll just see what happens. I think the film is out on July the 7th, so we're not overly far away at this point.
And as if leading in from the previous news story, just this week we find out that Resident Evil Death Island is getting a comic book, and it starts this week.
Yes, I think it was tweeted out today as we're recording this, maybe yesterday, that there is going to be a tie-in comic. There's no real detail on what this is, whether it's like a straight-up adaptation, which seems entirely plausible, or it's a new story. But looking at the image that we've got, or the couple of images that got tweeted out, it looks like it is an adaptation of the film, which is what makes it so weird that it is literally starting this Friday, a month and a half out from the film's release. Obviously, the film will be out before the comic finishes, as is the way with these things. But yes, coming from Comic Hue on May 19th, the first issue. No idea about a worldwide release. Of course, we have to assume that this is just Japan for now, but obviously we'll keep everyone in the loop. Steve, how are you feeling about more Resident Evil comics? You've got an appropriate episode, perhaps, to talk about?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I really want to dig into them now. Like, we're going to get to the end of the WildStorm run soon enough, and seeing the more, dare I say, polished or in line with continuity stuff has always been intriguing, and this one looks to be a lot of fun. The artwork for the kind of survivalist standoff with all the characters doing their best gun poses with, both the Redfields dual wielding, Jill getting ready to kill somebody, and Leon looking confused as to why he's got a handgun. It's neat. I'm going to obviously wait until the film drops, and I think that's probably the best way to go. But obviously, if this is like a promotional run-up thing, it may have a prologue or whatever. I'm not sure it's the content of the story yet, so I'm kind of, I'm a bit in the wings.
Yeah, we don't know a whole lot about what this is, so yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Are we going to get spoilers for the film on the timeline because of the comic? Who knows? But there might be some interesting stuff that's in it that's not in the film in the long run. Obviously, we'll cover it eventually. It's interesting as well because Infinite Darkness's comic book is still going on. Like, issue 2 just arrived for me a few weeks ago after months of delay, and issue 3 is apparently coming out this month, but we'll see. So there's going to be 2 ongoing sort of comic series at the time.
Are they the same company making them?
I don't believe so. No, I'm pretty sure this is more of a manga, whereas the other one is a bit more of a traditional Western comic book. So yeah, it seems like a separate thing. But James, any interest in Death Island comic book?
I would be more interested if I knew I could get my hands on it.
That's
fair. I don't think I'm going to be able to. I only get my comics really from my local LCS, so like and he's had such a problem trying to get the Infinite Darkness comics. I think it's a symptom of like the pandemic, etc. But yeah, printing is in a bad state at the moment. I love the cover. The covers are cool. They're really cool. But yeah, as Steve says, I need to watch the really, really nice covers. Other than that, sorry, I'm being a real Debbie Downer today. I'm not that excited because there isn't really much to show, and it's like not really much to talk on.
No, that's completely fair. Showing any thoughts on the comic adaptation of Death Island, or is it yet more Where's Mary?
I love the way you start laughing asking that question. I'm sure it'd be, if that's your thing, cool. I'm sure it's very exciting. It's not mine.
Fair. Okay, cool. That'll do it for the news. Let's jump into our main topic of discussion, which is a return to Comic Club with Resident Evil Fire and Ice. And now, reading the file, Stuart's Valediction from Resident Evil Revelations 2, Peter D, who you can find on YouTube via the link in the description.
Master Alex, it has truly been an honor and a blessing to have served under you these past few decades. I consider myself lucky to have been witness to your scientific genius and your vision of the future. The world does need order, and I believe it is you and only you who is capable of accomplishing this feat. I, as well as the other researchers, are all bonded together in this belief. To ensure your survival, we have worked tirelessly to complete the transfer procedure. The vessel we have selected is without fault. I have every confidence that the procedure will go flawlessly. To come this far, we've had to make countless sacrifices. My faith in your vision is resolute. So, I prepared myself to shoulder the mental and emotional burdens of the sins that I would be committing. But I do believe that before your plan can succeed, we must first atone for our sins. So I have taken the necessary steps for atonement. The remaining researchers have all been dealt with, and I too shall soon follow. This will also help you to perform the procedure without any distractions. On behalf of those who have served faithfully by your side, we are grateful for the opportunity to help you accomplish your ambitions. Eternally, your loyal servant, Stuart.
Okay, so we've covered a little bit of WildStorm in the past. Obviously, we did their sort of first 5-issue run a little while back now of sort of anthology stories. It went down successfully enough that, they've done a whole bunch. Well, they did a whole bunch since. This is the second part of sort of 4 WildStorm sagas. And this one was released bi-monthly between December 2000 and May 2001. What's interesting about this is that it is a continued sort of story from the anthology that we had before. Various bits and pieces have kind of coalesced into something, including the sort of main running story from the last few issues about Chris and company going to Europe a little bit. But because of licensing agreements, they couldn't use the game characters so much. They had to make an original cast of characters, so we have Stars Charlie team. The story was written by Chris Oprisco and Ted Adams, with art by Lee Bermejo and Mark Irwin. I think all of these people, or the vast majority of them, worked on that first run of WildStorm stuff. Especially the writers, this is them carrying on that tale. So, that's nice as well. So it really does kind of feel like it carried on a little bit. Before we get into the actual story and breaking down each comic book, on that note, talking about the team, let's talk about the art style of Fire and Ice. My assumption is that none of us have read this before because none of us read the other comics, so it'd be a little bit weird otherwise. So I don't think we need to cover that. Let's just start breaking it down. Steve, how did you feel about the art for Fire and Ice, this 4-issue little series?
Honestly, at times it feels stronger than its predecessor, but other times it feels dirtier and messier. Like, I'm not that well versed in comics, as I'm pretty sure we all know, right? But there are moments where they compose a really good shot that I've got a colour shading, and it's conveying the action very well. And then other times it's blurry, it's messy, it's manic, and yeah, I don't know how I feel about that, to be honest with you. Some of the faces as well become wildly inconsistent. Particularly one character, the Thai Australian gentleman, Quan Williamson, who we'll probably get into a bit later. He seems to have his face shift upon the fly from page to page. It's a bit strange for me on that one. Like, I don't dislike it. There are moments where it seems to be a bit 2000 AD or Judge Dredd-ish, maybe even a bit Tank Girl-ish, but yeah, it's okay.
That's about where I'm at with it as well. Like, I think that it's good that it is, along with the writers, that the art is consistent throughout this. It was very important because it's not an anthology of random stories. It is a continuing plot, so it makes sense that they're telling an arcing narrative, and it looks mostly the same. I will agree there is some weird stuff in there. And yeah, one of the big negatives that I had coming out with this is I found a fair amount of the action is kind of hard to follow. I had to relook over pages to just be like, what is... Even from the offset, I was like, what is going on in this whole little section? Some parts I never figured out, but I just kind of went, do you know what? Whatever. I don't suppose it matters all that much. There's plenty more action to come. Sherwin, how do you feel about the art style of Fire and Ice?
It's interesting. I found... Started off, I don't want to say strong, but started off okay, and then by the last issue was just not good. For me, there was a real deterioration in terms of the actual quality, and a lot of what, again, to echo what the other guys have said, I just found, face details and just haphazard lines and kind of random body parts being, like larger or smaller or whatever else. There's a lack of consistency in the artwork, which really just kind of starts really hammering home by the time you get to issue 4. So, and there's also, and we will get to this, but there's some really jarring colour choices and scene changes and stuff in this. So, but yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I do get that. I do think that even though some of the characters' proportions and stuff like that do get a little bit funny, one thing that I would say that I did find positive about it is that the characters are still mostly identifiable as we go, especially some of the ones that have a bit more design in them in the first place. And I like that they've all got, so the important thing for, artwork like this, they've all got distinguishable silhouettes. Like, even when they're just kind of like shadowed versions of themselves somewhere in the back of a corridor and it's just their shadow. You've got, Fields, she has a bandage around her arm, so you can see that already, like that's not coloured in a certain way, so you can tell that it's her. Someone's got a mohawk, really obvious. I mean, it's the year 2000, right? So it was a thing. But again, it makes it easy to identify characters, so I appreciate that part of it at least. James, how did you feel about the art style?
Not much else to be said, really. There's, like, at the beginning, there is a really awesome 2-page spread where you get a really quick kind of flashback with you get Chris, Jill, Claire, you get this really cool kind of dissection of the Tyrant as well.
Yeah.
A lot of detail been put into that 2-page spread. It was very cool. But yeah, like Quan Williamson, just like, you know, one page looking like I don't play Street Fighter, the green guy from Street Fighter, Blanca, and then the next page just having like someone had put a bucket of water over his head. You know, it was very strange. I was concerned, and this will probably go into kind of story, but I was concerned that they were putting too many characters, because when I'm reading a comic, it's visual, right? And you're also trying to build a story in your mind while it's going. And if you have too many characters on the panel at once, it can get very confusing. And I was concerned that was going to be a problem, but they did kind of fix it. Yeah, that kind of goes into artwork, because there was just so many. I was like, I'm not going to be able to tell who all these people are. I'm not going to be able to remember who all these people are. Like, but I did eventually, much to my chagrin.
You can tell where this episode's going already. Yeah, I agree. That sort of two-page spread thing that you were talking about is really worth looking at for anyone who hasn't read it. And obviously, with comic book episodes, same with books, we've got to try our best to explain what we saw without the benefit of everyone else having the same visual aid. But yeah, that two-page spread sort of flashback thing is probably the highlight of the whole thing for me. Visually speaking, it looks good. Artwork wise, and the layout is really good as well. And there are a few pages throughout it that I think have really cool panel layouts, like where some stuff will go across, like the first panel will go across both page 1 and page 2, like the left and the right, and then we'll go down from there. I was like, oh, that's kind of neat. Like Steve, I don't have tons of comic book experience, so I don't know how common that kind of thing is, but I certainly don't see it all that often. So, you know, there are bits and pieces that were like, oh, it's kind of neat. But yeah, overall, not massively impressive, I get, is the general feeling. So yeah, I guess we'll move on into story, and we'll flip through this issue by issue. There is only 4, so it won't take all that much amount of time. For a little bit of setup, Stars Charlie team is a Charlie team of stars. That's basically it. We're kind of acting on a little bit like book logic, where Stars is a bit bigger, it feels like, not just like these two groups in Raccoon City. It feels more like a proper organisation, but we don't get a lot of backstory in it that we didn't get in WildStorm's previous comic books. And yeah, that they're going on missions, and we get a whole bunch of them, and we'll just sort of go from there. Sherwin, how did you feel about issue 1?
So, rolls up sleeves. I think the... I mean, I don't know what your headers are, so I don't know if theme or feel is one of the later ones, and if it is, then I'll shorten this a bit. But
no, feel free to go in on it.
I think the problem that this entire series suffered from is it feels so very disconnected from the series' survival horror roots, and it feels so very much like a wasted opportunity to do something genuinely quite interesting within the world. I mean, we all know what Resident Evil is. Resident Evil, at the point where this comes out, is a very known entity. It's not something where people have to be educated on what a Resident Evil game is. Now you might do that because there's so many different entry points into it. But go back to then, it's not. Everyone knows what it is, and it creates this universe which has so much ground to cover it that's needed in exposition and everything else, that it almost creates itself this massive burden that it can't ever fulfill, because it's trying to introduce a whole new team of Stars operatives. It's trying to introduce where it's set. It's trying to introduce why they're doing what they're doing. It's trying to tell you the actual story. It's trying to just do so much work, whereas what it could have done is just zoomed in much more to something which has more traditional horror vibes to it, and actually the audience doesn't care about a whole bunch of that stuff. Because think about the original Resident Evil. None of us really cared about why there were zombies in the mansion when you first step into it. None of us really care about the backstories of any of the characters while we're in there. None of us really care about where the zombies are coming from or whatever else. All we care about is what's actually happening in front of us. If you have a strong enough visual presence, if you have a strong enough story that's unfolding, all of that can happen. Instead, there's this smorgasbord of information at the start. And so much of it just feels so jarringly wrong, or feels incongruous with Resident Evil. Like the intro to this is like an episode from G.I. Joe.
It really is.
It's an episode of G.I. Joe, and you've got all the stereotypes, and they're bad, like that you could expect. You've got Falcon, who's the leader. You've got the Mexican tracker who's actually got Amerindian roots, and that's why they're a tracker, because obviously Amerindians, right? You've got the Australian guy. We can't really understand him, and he's crazy. Apparently he's face shifting as well. You have the guy with a mohawk who's like the computer guy, because of course he is. And then you have someone who's got, I've just got a sixth sense of when Umbrella's involved in things. That just means he walks around constantly telling everyone, I think Umbrella's involved in this, and 9 times out of 10 he's right, because they're in Umbrellaville. Yeah, it just...
Because they're in a Resident Evil comic.
Exactly. It just feels cheap for what Stars is. Like, it takes Stars and just makes... Like, it just makes Stars just feel kind of crap. Like, it really does. I've got no other way of saying that. And I think this, for me, is such a massive swing and a miss in terms of... The real issue is, at some stage, and I'm not going to say Capcom did this, I don't think they did, but people who were creating Resident Evil stories started thinking that Resident Evil fans are stupid. And they started really dumbing down what Resident Evil content looked like and was. Because we weren't originally, we were just playing a game and we were finding out bits and pieces and intricacies and everything else. It was never Dark Souls, but it was always something where you had to think about... Like, look at the original. You've got this really goofy intro with, don't open that door, and so on. But then also you've got Keeper's Diary. Yeah, you've got... There's a real attention to detail and stuff that you go off the beaten track and you will find Easter eggs and so on. This is a prime example of what happens when someone goes, oh, it's Resident Evil. It's just basically just like, we go kill zombies. It's just kind of, it's the lowest common denominator. And I think that drags it down so much. And it's really obvious right from the go with this.
Yeah, the intro to this is, it's funny you say G.I. Joe, because it feels like a toy commercial. Like, here's this one, this is what he can do, and then they can lead off to the next one, that's what they can do. So, yeah, it felt like that. It felt like the knockoff toy version of Stars. Like, it's almost, if you squint a bit, you could almost be like, yeah, I could see maybe how some of these are Stars, but they're all so caricature-y that it's just too much for me. There are parts about it that I kind of enjoy the way they did it, where they do kind of like have the backstory on one, and then someone makes a quip, and then we get the backstory on another. That felt a little bit TV show or whatever. But we got like 2 sets of intros for all the characters as well. They did it once when they were having a fight, and then they did it again basically when they got back to base. Yeah, super weird, that intro. Really, really odd. James, how did you feel about issue 1?
Where do I start? Probably on the first page, where I get introduced to 3 characters, like at the same time. Like, it's wild. It's like, that's the thing that I was worried about earlier on, was like all of these characters are being thrown at you. And yes, it did like feel at the beginning, I was like, oh, okay, they're going for the Resident Evil 1 like title screen kind of thing, and they're turning it up to 20. So I wasn't too bad, but then it went on for like 3/4 of the magazine.
Yeah.
Right. And on and on and on. And it's like, there was like some other stuff in there that was not PC either. And they didn't do their research. I literally, all I needed, this is in year 2000, they have books available to them. Right. But you don't need to put Native American and Mexican people when it comes to folks that live in Arizona, right? They apparently, I looked into this Native American tribe, like that she was supposedly descended from, right? And they're the Hopi people, and they have like they have roots to Mexico. So there's no reason to say, oh, she's half Native American and Mexican. You don't need to say that. You just, I know I'm just being nitpicky with that, but it just felt very buzzwordy. And when it came out at the time, it would have been like nothing. But when I look back at it now, I go, ugh, that's not cool.
Yeah.
When it comes to the story, just as Sherwin said, it's disjointed. I was having a real hard time keeping up until they split. When they split, I was like, I actually took like a mental breather. Like, I went, oh, like my brain just kind of like took a breath, and I was like, okay, maybe this will improve. Because now I can actually concentrate on 2 stories with less characters rather than focusing on one story that's got all of this huge host of characters. I also put down in my notes that the beginning of this, I now don't blame Paul W.S. Anderson as much because I think maybe Mr. Anderson,
saw a little bit of this.
He looked at that and this comic, and maybe they said, yeah, this is an example of what we want Resident Evil to be, and I don't know. I looked in like kind of the blurbs at the end, and they were saying that they didn't really get much say from Capcom and what they were going to do. They just wanted to create stories, but I do feel like he's probably looked at this and gone, oh sweet, this is Resident Evil.
Yeah. Oh, Capcom don't care what we do. Write stories. Cool. Got it.
Exactly. Oh, I made the money. Great. Let's just keep going. And that like continues throughout. I'm not kidding here, folks. The first comic, the first issue, right, is like 75% them introducing themselves, right, while they're killing a circus of zombies.
Yep. Literally a circus of zombies.
It's crazy. It's wild. Like and it's not exciting. Like you think, oh, there's this Charlie team of stars, and they are fighting a circus of zombies with elephants and acrobats and bearded ladies and like all the clowns, the typical stuff you find like at oldie kind of circuses. And you think that sounds really exciting and very cheesy, but it just didn't work because you're focusing on like too many things at once. You're focusing on backstory of the characters. You're focusing on you trying to get familiar with the characters. You're trying to focus on what's happening in the background. You're also trying to focus on a subplot because they're talking about Umbrella. I'm pretty sure Umbrella was the only word that they were given, they were allowed to say when it came to anything. Maybe Umbrella and the previous characters, right? But yeah, you could look at this first issue as well as the others, and you could just say it was something else, to be honest. Like, if you just
take the dialogue out.
Yeah, if you just, like, put something else into the dialogue, like, it's not Umbrella, it's Not Bad Pharma Company, or, whatever. You could put whatever in there, and it didn't feel Resident Evil, even though I saw what they were trying to do. Like, I really did see what they were trying to do, but it was too much for characters we didn't care about. Like, they kept on trying to reference you to previous editions, right? And it was like, what's his name? The ginger guy, pretty boy, they kept calling him. Patrick, right? Kept on saying, he survived the zoo and, etc. It's like, but we barely got to know that guy in that issue. Like, as well. Yeah. So that was you're only going to give us, like, that issue, which was only about 7 to 8 pages long, plus like, and it's mostly him just running away and trying not to die, and then like this where it's just talking about his tragic backstory, but I don't care about the character because he hasn't been fleshed out, and at the same time he's in the middle of all these other like supposedly big personalities that also have tragic backstories.
Every single one of them. Every single one of them. Yeah.
So that is issue 1, guys. Like, it's just them introducing themselves to you as the viewer, and it's done.
I think it's really funny what you said about the movie because it's obviously very relevant because in issue 1, like as they do with many comic books, they have like a reader's letters sort of thing in the back. And in issue 1, someone asks them about the film and they go, we don't know, we don't have any information about the movie. And then by issue 2, they're like, here's a bunch of information about the movie. We're so excited. So it's funny you mentioned that. If I was going to give this some positives, because I know we're being really down on it, I do feel like the choice of clown zombies and at the end, sort of Day of the Dead celebrators as zombie fodder, that makes sense. I like that. That kind of works. Yeah. It worked for me. I wouldn't say it's over-inventive, but it's a good look.
How long did we spend on that?
No, exactly. The Day of the Dead one was just like ridiculous as well, because it bleeds into issue 2 and you still don't get any more, but... there are a few cool panels. I posted it in admin chat when I was reading it. There's a section where they blow up an elephant for some reason in one panel. Like literally, it's just suddenly on fire and then it's gone. I was like, that is absolute madness. Yeah, this issue is kind of madness, really. It somehow manages to drag for ages and yet also breeze because nothing really happens. Steve, now we've all gone in on it. How do you feel about issue 1?
So I can't remember the name of the campaign, but there's a Left 4 Dead campaign, Left 4 Dead 2 campaign, where they go to a circus, and throughout the entirety of the opening few pages, that mixed with the opening text of X-Men is pretty much the entire vibe. Like, you know, Falcon, Patrick Brady, Jesse Alcorn. You know, it's just all character introduction and no substance. The action, while it's big and bombastic, is also flat. Like, you've got a man dressed as a Fallout cosplayer with a Tesla gun, and you made it boring. That's amazing, really. Much like everyone else has said, it's more character setup and stuff for people we've never met, which obviously I get why that in terms of, like, you can't use the Stars characters to make your own up. But they're all, like, somewhere between X-Men, 80s action heroes, and generic super characters. Like, you know, your hacker man who's literally in the middle of a zombie horde playing with his computer, for example. It didn't do much for me. Like, the zombie circus, really, like, you know, I wish we'd actually seen like a bit of build up. Like, maybe they walk in there, they're doing normal circus smaller things, and then it all goes a bit crazy. As opposed to, there we go, page 2, fight. The opening page, the first page, as you peel it back, like, actually has a hint of terror in it, and then it's squandered by giant action set piece because it just cuts away, and that's a shame. And yeah, much like everybody else, the Day of the Dead stuff, which appears at the very end of this comic, was probably the most compelling bit, where you have like people dressed in makeup. Are they really zombies? Oh no, they are actually really zombies, not people dressed in makeup. That little hook is great, but until then, it's just violence and setup. It's a little bit. It's not my cup of tea. It didn't set a good tone for the start for me.
Speaking of hooks as well, and I don't know. You know, by now these things are very tired. Maybe they were less tired back then, but I kind of doubt it. There is a couple of things in issue 1, story setup wise, that are just like so obvious. Like, they just picked the 2 obvious things. So they go to the circus or whatever, and at the end they find an umbrella scientist who basically is like, haha, we knew you were coming here. So implying that there's a mole. Also, the character of Fields, who's not on the job with them, comes back. She sort of unravels the bandage on her arm. She's infected, dun dun dun. So the hooks for the story are, there is a mole and one of us is infected and not telling anyone. It's like, that is the most obvious stuff you could have possibly picked. Some of that's in Resident Evil 1 and you're just doing it again. Like,
the mole, which they give away pretty much like 4 or 5 pages in if you just read the dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah, I wondered about that as well. Yeah, and the other one, well, we'll get to the other one. Okay, that'll do it for issue 1 then. Let's move on to issue 2. This is where describing the story of it's going to be really hard because I read it 2 nights ago and I now no longer remember already. So carrying on from the Day of the Dead stuff, there is, who would have thought, some action set pieces where things blow up. Steve, how did you feel about issue 2?
The interesting hook, we've immediately switched straight to Nebraska, and our superheroes are now going on jet skis fighting cast-offs from Altered Beast. It's I wasn't expecting that as the opener. It's different. So for those who are literally listening and haven't read the book right now, Charlie Team are in 2 locations: Fire, South America, and Ice, Nebraska. And literally all they're looking for is Umbrella Labs. And one side has zombies that are themed after Day of the Dead, and the other has Altered Beast monsters. That's literally all that really happens. They have a big kerfuffle, and then I believe they get kidnapped on the Nebraskan side. And I'm just gonna hang on. Let me be a bit professional. I'm just gonna quickly
go for it. You go for that. I just want to point out when Steve says Altered Beast, he literally means the kind of BOWs that the internet would be really horny for if they saw them these days. It's literally muscle-bound god bodies with a bear head, a wolf head, a walrus head. One is a whale, which is incredibly weird. And also, the best part of the comic book, James, I know you agree with this because you lost your mind when you saw it. There's a penguin with dinosaur wings that shows up.
Oh, God. I've just skimmed it. The entire action in South America is so brown and grey, I couldn't figure out what was going on. They just find a secret code to some ruins. Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm more for penguin monsters though.
For sure. James, how did you feel about... Oh, sorry, go on.
I'm just getting the image now. Sorry, 1 second.
In that case, Sherwin, how did you feel about issue 2?
Do you know, let's do the negative bits. So, at this point, it became like the bit where, let's split up the teams. Well, why? Like, why? Why have you split up a team? They're a combat team. They're designed to work together. Let's split them up. It just seemed like that never happened with Stars Alpha and Bravo team.
There was no rush or anything that said they needed to go to both potential lab locations.
Yeah, you've just kind of just halved your team, which is built around this specialist team that all have a dedicated role within a combat unit. So effectively, you've massively reduced their combat capability by doing this. And this is where it starts to be really jarring, cutting between the two, because exactly what Steve said. One is, in an ice field, and then the other one is in this, well, as far as I can work out, some sort of quick-sound-induced brownness, which is just rubbish. And it kind of becomes really jarring switching between the two, because there's no visual identity to it. Think about Resident Evil games. You start off in one location, you go through that one location, then you go to a new location, and then you stay there for a bit, and then you go to the third location or whatever, and so on. But you have a visual identity to where you are, so you're not trying to work out, where am I? What's going on? And that's exactly what every single panel in this thing was doing. Like, it starts off, right, I'm reading this. Where am I? What's going on? Because it just seems so, combined with the poor drawing, just meant that it was really hard to understand what's going on. So that aside, I loved the stupidity of the different monsters. It was literally like reading Guyver manga again. There's a hammerhead shark bro. There's exactly what you said. There's walrus bro. I thought it was a chonky dragon. I'm happy to go with whatever that thing was. It's amazing the way it's just winging around in the background in one of the panes. Like, at this point, you said that there wasn't enough inventiveness to this. There's so much inventiveness to this episode in the worst way, and I don't mean so bad it's good. So bad it's bargain basement bad. Like, it's just so poor. But there's a Schadenfreudish gene in me which just starts laughing stupidly at this stuff, because it was just so Guyver. Like, if someone suddenly started talking about how they've got bio lasers built into their shoulders, I'd be well happy.
I mean, yes, I will say it's not like I had a terrible time reading this. It wasn't so horrifically bad that I was like bored. Yes, I agree. I was certainly confused in places, but I was kind of laughing at the the quite literally altered beast transformations. I'm so glad we all landed on that, because that is literally all it was. It was like this at this point. James, you said it yourself. You take, when you were saying take all the dialogue out, it's basically whatever it wants to be. This is really so far away from anything that you're just like, you know what, whatever. Let's just go with it and see what happens. I did like that there was something akin to a puzzle clue in this one, where they have to look at a painting and they get like a word. I don't think that ever actually went anywhere.
No. Well, they couldn't get the puzzle. That's the problem. They just gave up.
They can figure out. Yeah, they just wound up blowing up the door or whatever, didn't they? Yeah. Yeah, it's fine. Any more thoughts on issue 2, James?
Oh, yeah. So... a bio booster penguin, by the way. That's what we need in the next issue. To all the 2 Guyver fans out there, it's just me and Sherwin. But yeah, I was going to mention the thing about the painting. What I found funny about that is that they just like randomly found it, and the art was so bad on that panel that I had no idea what they were looking at. I thought it was a hole in a wall, and there was, I didn't really know what was going on. And then they had to explain it. Like, that's what's so bad. But also, I can't lie, I was laughing so hard. So I was having a fun time reading this. Mm-hmm. Like, I can't not say that, because I was. But they had to, like, throw exposition at me to understand what was happening by issue 2. Like, that out of 4, that's really bad. Yeah, like I understand also the criticism of the splitting the party. It helped me, but at the same time, it didn't really help these guys, did it? Like, they really got their, as Steve would say, their poop pushed in. But just when there's like a really cool panel where Cardenas and Quan are phoning in, and they're talking to each other over the radio, and then there's like a cut, and you see like the wereman, wereman wolf, right, in the cave, and I thought, oh, cool, that's cool. Like, we're gonna get like zombie werewolves or some kind of basis origins there. No, we're just gonna go completely wild. We're just gonna do a orca buff orca buff buff wolf buff. I call, for some reason, maybe because I was very tired last night when I read this, but I put Captain Walrusher for some reason, just because they were in Siberia. I just want to point out all the funny bits, because I given up on actually talking about this issue. But yeah, the funniest bit for me was, I think it was Quan. No, it wasn't, because Quan wasn't there. It was Patrick was running away, and the penguin used its beak to grab his leg.
Yeah.
I tripped him over.
That's what penguins do, obviously.
I was laughing so hard. Like, I just was imagining this penguin on the ground just flapping, doing the penguin angel. And Patrick, pretty boy, just runs by and he clamp down. You just imagine that scene in front of you. Oh, it was so funny. Just comedy genius. I did find, though, that there was a bit, I think it was at the end of this one, it might have been the end of the next one, but there were some cool transitions. There were some cool transitions from character to, from scene to scene. So from, like, the fire to the ice, for instance, and the ice back to the fire. Sometimes it got lost in translation, and I forgot where I was for a second, as well. But I like to say something positive, and that's probably the only bit. Other than just it being... Reading this, I was treating it like it was a comedy because it was making me laugh so much.
Yeah, that is completely fair. There is some hilarious sort of wonderful circumstance. They blow up this random town in Mexico or wherever it is they are, and with like a grenade or a bunch of grenades or something, and it just so happens that the one pillar on somebody's home that they didn't get blown up has the painting that they, in theory, could have used the code on. But that's a great example of a transition that really confused me. What they tried to do is have it so you look at the painting and then you see them kind of driving towards the same building. But they literally just copied and pasted the same image and just sort of like rotated it slightly. Like, they didn't do a different angle of the same building in the painting and say, right, they're arriving here now. It's just the same thing in the next panel, except now there's a car. It's like, that is so weird. But yeah, okay.
Wait. We forgot. I forgot Sorry, I'm going down on my list of funnies. We forgot the best one-liner, and it's when Cardenas turns to Patrick and says, "Don't you know penguins can't fly?"
So dumb.
There is one small bit of character development that I think we've kind of all gone over. The red-haired lady cuts a growing out of her arm spike, which is a big symptom that something is wrong, and that magically stops all of the problems she's ever going to have.
But that was also done really quickly. Like, it was very spur of the moment. Like, I again, because we didn't get much character development with these characters, it felt very strange. Because she just looked at her arm going, "Ah!" and gets a cleaver and chops her horn off.
That's how you do it, isn't it? Just massively rapid surgery. I'm sure a meat cleaver should do bone that and get one swift shot.
Yeah, I played Monster Hunter. It works.
It's convenient, isn't it? So yes, he's still infected by... Oh, I guess... My assumption is you just cut it out and she's still infected by this point, but clearly as we get onto, that's not a thing. And now, reading the file Operator's Notebook from Resident Evil Dead Aim, Disco Alexia Petrozeg Now, who you can follow on Twitter at DiscoAlexia1.
June 16th, 1997. 1 month has passed since I was dispatched here. I am astounded at the sloppy supervision of this umbrella waste disposal facility. It's not surprising that this accident happened. I know that if I must die, I want to die as a human. June 24th, 1997. The supervisor here, called Morpheus, is so annoying. He drives me nuts. He must pay more attention to the worker health management and biological weapons than anyone I have ever met. This facility belongs to Umbrella, but he obviously doesn't think so. I have no idea how long I have been here. I don't want to stay in this facility, but I can't move. My body, it won't move.
Issue number 3 then, so we're halfway there already. Man, again, I don't remember what was what, but now they're kind of in not Alaska, the other one, in Fire, they're exploring a lab, and meanwhile in Ice they've been kidnapped. Stuff's going on. Steve, actually I'm going to start with you because you know the story, but you've read it more than I have. What's going on? Tell us about issue 3.
So it's my first note is it's a lot uglier. Like the budget seems to have gone. Like the quality of the artwork has taken a nosedive, except for one bit in the South American side of things. We now have a tyrant or some form of knockoff tyrant. Unfortunately, our Charlie team compatriots have been prepared and brought a rocket launcher, so it just gets insta-killed fundamentally. Gets knocked down once, but then they just gets back up and rocket. It's done and dusted. In Nebraska, though, we have returning school child who became G-Virus mutant, who became normal human, has aged 20 years in the space of God knows when this is set. I'm assuming still 98. Has become an evil, cliched scientist man, complete with cybernetic components, torturing Patrick Brady and Cardenas. So it's all kicking off. However, my last note is just biohazard cactuses. So I'm a little bit...
Steve, I'm exactly with you. My last note, all in capitals, is biohazard cactus crop circle.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a wild one, absolutely. I don't hate, and we'll talk about... I'm just going to save this for characters and it'll probably come back up, but I don't hate that they've taken some of the weird stories from, Resident Evil, the official comic magazine that we already covered, and turned them into something. By turning that child... We had a lot to say about that story last time because it was so weird as part of the anthology as like a villain origin story. And they've turned it into something... Although, yes, it is weird that he's suddenly older and half robot and he's got like... The guys that came to pick him up to employ him for Umbrella are now sort of like his left and right hand or whatever, which is ironic because one of them loses a hand. Yeah, I don't know. It's really odd. I know the whole point was that they were meant to check out both Umbrella labs. But what this amounts to in Fire is that they basically went there to watch a video of the lab in Alaska and go, oh no, we got to go save our friends. And then they blow up the lab, I suppose. I agree, the tyrant looks okay. But yes, I was cackling at this crop circle made of cactuses in the shape of the biohazard symbol. I was like, wow, how on the nose could you possibly be? Sherwin, how did you feel about issue 3?
Obviously going to echo a whole bunch of stuff. What was, I think, spectacularly, if you hadn't lost hope for this series by now, the fact of how much they threw away the tyrant. Like, here's a tyrant. Oh, it's cool. It's here for 2 paints. Oh, it's blown up. Great. But it's almost to the point where, when I first read it, I'm like, okay, so the tyrant's going to get up because the whole point is they just killed it so easily. Oh no, it's just dead. Oh, okay. Good times.
Yep.
A couple of things. It was nice to understand, and Steve will get this reference, what happened to Doc Ockerville after G1 Transformers. That was good.
No, you're right.
That was good to know what happened to him in later years. I quite like the way they just casually invent a new virus because, as you do, I guess, if Resident Evil is your thing, yes. You want to invent Gen X's version of the X virus. I think I do have a note here, which is why do the scientists working in the lab look like they're working in a cafeteria?
They do.
They're basically like chefs. That's an interesting one. The real issue is, and exactly what you guys have talked about, like the whole thing at this point. This is where it was already kind of like the pacing is already insanely off for the whole series anyway. Like right from the double intro kind of massive weight of exposition and just badly done first issue to the just off the wall craziness that doesn't make any sense whatsoever, and why we're splitting up the teams, all the other craziness of the second issue. This one, it's so obvious that this thing is going so fast, it's flying off the rails everywhere. The pacing is just, it's going so fast that the story is just all over the show. Like, nothing makes sense, nothing is happening in any sensible way whatsoever, and it's just kind of just this raw mess of just random images thrown together at this point. This is probably the worst worst issue, I think. Probably.
It's a tough call, really, isn't it? It's a tough call. James, how do you feel about issue 3?
Yeah, I just want to go back to the cactuses. Cacti. It's just my note here is you have the smartest minds of Umbrella and then kept the antidote in a cactus in the middle of a desert that anyone could have just sliced open.
Yeah, I think that's issue 4 technically, isn't it, when they get that, but still, either way.
Oh, was it? Yeah. Sure. The cactus is that, man. Yeah, and the fact, like, how did they get there? Like, I thought they got there by car, and then suddenly there's a helicopter?
Yeah, sure, yeah, okay, yeah, good point. Amidst the stream of just whatever this series was, I didn't even really notice that, but you make a great point.
They were just like, literally, it was like, Arnie, get to the chopper, poof, the helicopter appears.
Can I just throw a question out here?
Yeah.
How far away is South America, generic South American location, from Nebraska? Because I can't help but feel helicopter ride isn't going to cut it.
That is literally what I've got there. Yeah. It's about 3.5 thousand miles away in a helicopter. Presumably that helicopter was really powerful in order to take them there with all the fuel already on board, because that is... And they managed to do it in no time at all as well.
Knowing these guys, they probably punched through the earth together.
They went all the way around instead, just to prove a point.
Yeah. I did, to speak I'm trying to think of one positive per issue. A positive was that we got to see liquors, and there was a mention of them being used as literally being controlled, like bodyguards, and so was everything else, right? And I thought that's interesting because that's literally what like the founders of Umbrella have been trying to do.
What's also fun about that is, and this goes back to issue 1, is that they talk about like the lions and the elephants and stuff. This is before Outbreak File 2, which does all that, and Controlled Liquors is kind of everything in Resident Evil 5 when you get the liquor betas from Tricell. So this did Resident Evil 5 9 years in advance.
Oh, interesting.
There you go.
Yeah, I just I think that's really cool.
That's fair.
Also, I was going to talk about earlier on. Well, I mentioned it earlier on. Sorry, but that's also something that Neil Blomkamp was going to try and do for the Xenomorphs in the new movie that he was going to make in Alien 5 before Ridley Scott put his foot on it. But it's just cool because they did it first, basically. Because liquors, even though hunters are like pretty much up there in terms of xenomorphs, like for me, if like in terms of references, liquors also have like very similar traits.
Oh, absolutely.
And yeah, it's just cool. As well as recently there was, I want to say recently, the past 6-7 years, there was a comic called Aliens Fire and Stone. Aliens vs Predator Fire and Stone, and this has a similar, and it has a kind of similar kind of story as well. But yeah, that's the only alien reference you're getting this podcast. But yeah, that was a cool bit, but the rest of it was tosh. Like it didn't. It like, is it this one where another funny bit was where is this the one where Quan finds the surveillance helicopter randomly?
As well, the tiny miniature one.
Yeah, the little tiny surveillance.
I think that is the beginning of issue 4.
Oh, okay. This is where I'm getting messed up. Then I should probably. I should probably mark these up. Then I'll wait for that. I'll wait for that for my
issue 3. What makes, if I remember rightly, issue 3 sort of like closing moment is the sort of zoom out and see the cactuses that form the biohazard.
Oh, yeah.
Like that's the big dun dun dun, as if it's meant to mean anything. It's a biohazard symbol. It's like, so what? Like some idiot just planted a bunch of cactus in a shape. Like whoopsie doo. Like what does this mean?
It was also funny because they did the thing that they've been doing through the other 3 issues. Well, the other 2 issues, which was just like randomly say exposition, like, oh, it's making a pattern. What do you mean? How do you see? These are huge. We know how big cacti get.
Yeah.
They get freaking so big. There's no way you'd be able to tell
see
it's a
that.
pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Like, unless you get into your miraculously respawning helicopter and go up and go see it. But yeah, got not much more because this is it. Like issue 2, 3, and 4 kind of, as you can tell from me, have kind of blurred and merged into one.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, in terms of not seeing things, it's also worth mentioning by the sort of this point in those letters to the writers and stuff. People are like, I really love the gore and the wild this and that monstrous transformation, all this, and I'm like, what? I'm not seeing that in this comic. Like, you both said about the Lickers and about the Tyrant especially. It's like, it looks cool for a moment and then it dies and that's it. Like, there's no terror related to it. There's nothing even particularly that gory about it. It just kind of explodes and it's gone. I feel like I'm reading a different comic to these people were 20 years ago.
Call me cynical, but if they weren't written by the staff...
Maybe.
They are
in some of them are literally just like, here's a recap of the story.
Yeah, they are the worst type of circle jerk ever. There's no other way to
yeah,
describe
for
it.
sure. Yeah.
I think what they were trying to do is they were trying to do the fastest the Stars speed run.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any
How quick
percent.
can we get to the end?
Yeah, any percent. Like, it's 4 issues.
Which is funny because that was me reading them. So
Yeah.
Yes, true. Speaking of quickly getting to the end, we are now on the final issue number 4. And at this point, yes, we have our tiny mini surveillance of a helicopter that gets blown in through Dexter Whitlam, the villain of the story's window. Page 3 of issue 4, and it's exploded in half, by the way, I just want to point out. So, yes, this is the sort of conclusion to the story. Dexter goes down, not particularly fighting. Instead, we have the group kind of fall apart a little bit because we have the mole stuff and we have some transformation because of the members of Charlie's team that were kidnapped have actually been injected with the X virus. See, I know the story of issue 4 at least. Showen, how did you feel about issue 4?
yeah, it's a thing, isn't it? It's got really jarring locations again. Still, like that's just it's basically a continuity. Excuse me, teeth back in shown. It's basically continuing the really terrible themes that we've seen throughout the rest of it. It's got terrible pacing. It's got the jarring locations. It's got the shoddy artwork. It's got a whole bunch of the speed of which you can't really tell what the hell's going on a lot of the time, or you have anytime you're reading something you have to go, hang on a minute, what just happened, and flick backwards a few pages to see if you missed something. Then realize, oh no, I didn't. It's just really it's really ambiguous. Like, that stuff is just what it is. And then the worst part is, I think it's kind of got like just a really crap finale, and then a feels bad ending. Like, not to skip forward for you guys because I'm sure you want to talk a little bit more about it, but there's just nothing redeemable about it except for the part you got a really feel bad ending and a poor finale, and then it gets to the last page and then there's people going, oh my god guys, I love your comic so much, oh it's amazing, and I'm just like, this is terrible, like please stop, just stop.
Oh man, yeah. Do you know, right, I'm going to do some positives on this one. I will hand it to them. The idea of hiding an antidote vial inside of a cactus is inventive. It's inventive nonsense, of course, but it's inventive. I've never seen anything like that before. Just, it's stupid, but like, do you know what? Okay, so that's an idea that you had. And also, and this might maybe more speaking in hindsight, but it is kind of fun that the final boss of the comic is like members of the team fighting each other. Because when that happens in Resident Evil, usually it's sort of like a sub-boss. Like, just things that I can think of, Stephen Code Veronica gets turned, and there's, what the hell's his name? Pablo or something in Revelations 2 in the shack. He gets turned, he's a random
Pedro
boss,
and Neil.
Pedro. And Neil as well. Neil definitely counts. Again, he's definitely like a sub-boss, though. He's not the final boss. It makes a change from the nut-job scientists that kind of inject themselves because they think they're so clever, to actually have like members of the team get infected, and that's the final showdown. That was kind of nice, but it is more of the same hard to follow action, especially at this point. Absolutely, I agree that even the silhouettes of the characters start melting into each other, and I don't really know what was what, and the story was just so paper thin that I don't really exactly remember how it finished, like who lived, who died. All I know is that the mole thing kind of went nowhere. You kind of found out that it was Jessie, even though it was extremely obvious. And Fields, I guess, her macheteing the horn off of her arm, I guess cured her because it never comes back up again. That's it. It's just okay now, I guess. It's not like she transformed for another reason or anything like that. It wasn't like a big surprise ending in that sense, a quote-unquote surprise ending. It just goes nowhere. And then, sad ending with Umbrella being like, haha, this was all part of our plan. I promise this is a setup for a sequel series, so we'll just slide this in one panel. Yeah, there's some stuff. I mean, I said I was going to say some good stuff, but then it just kind of started meandering into, no, do you know what? It wasn't that great. It's not that great. It's definitely not that great. It had a couple of bits in this that were amusing, like the other ones, like Whitlam exploding in half is a great panel in its own way. And a couple of the surprises in terms of where the plot went, but most of the plot just went absolutely nowhere. Steve, how did you feel about issue 4?
Pretty much the same as everybody else, unfortunately. I feel bad that we, when it comes to literary works based around Resident Evil, for example, like the S.D. Perry stuff, I think we went really in depth, enjoyed it, and we actually always had issues and foibles, but these just, they have such a malaise of generic action filler over and over and over again that it kind of all blurs together. It's novel that the main principal villain of the novel dies in page 2, of the final book, or the final comic rather.
Yeah.
But then it literally is just okay, and now Cardenas and Brady are going to become knockoff Hulks. What do we do? And a mass-shifting, teleporting helicopter appears with their colleagues and the antidote just in time, to save Quan and the rest before it all goes horribly wrong. It's got the nuggets and the ideas of potentially being an interesting story somehow if they trim out as much of the Saturday morning crap as possible. But unfortunately, we are so far past that point of no return, right in page 2 of issue 1 with Patrick Brady and his giant laser gun. So yeah, I'm going to be honest. Some of the action stuff is okay, but it damaged me.
Fair. James, to wrap us up before we move on to talking about some extra bits and pieces, how did you feel about issue 4?
Beauty, a wrecked surveillance helicopter. Must be the last of the season.
Oh, God.
That's what was going through my head in that panel. Right? Was Sid the Sloth eating the daffodil? The entire time, right? Because that's where my brain, Steve, I had been broken. This comic had broken me at this point, and I couldn't be serious, as I was watching it. I think shortly after that, the lab explodes, right? Everybody dies in the lab, by the way, except our heroes. However, where our heroes were sitting was exploded. Their chairs were completely obliterated. But the heroes were okay.
Yeah.
Obviously. For some reason.
Yeah.
Even Resident Evil, even the original Resident Evil games kind of fade to black, know, but no, it's just, it happened, it was just such a mess. It was I agree with you, Si. I do like the idea. There's and again, Steve said as well that there is a lot of potential here for a good story. And it's cool to have the, half your team, a third of your team turn against you through no fault of their own. That would have been a really sad, dark thing to put in a comic, right? But the comic was so cheesy and so blasé.
Yeah.
That you couldn't emotionally get invested. So it didn't really matter. That I was reading, I don't normally do this. I'm an avid comic book reader, and I was reading these panels, and my face was stony. I was like, where's the comedy? Give me the laughs, right? Because you can't make it sad now. Because the whole freaking thing has been a joke.
Ridiculous. Yeah.
You can't do that. Again, I had no connections to the characters. And I do believe, by the way, that there is a panel where she shows that she's still infected, by the way. Like she's still got a green arm.
Right. Okay.
But
Meh.
that's like the only reference. Yeah. I think. Is there continuations from this?
I don't think so. I'm
Okay.
pretty sure no.
I'm pretty sure like that. Whoever that operative was right at the end was probably thinking that Raquel was going to be like the bad guy in the next comics. Maybe it was going to be like a long term thing. But yeah, that didn't happen. I was expecting there to be sorry guys, there's going to be another one, an alien-esque, Resi-esque ending where you think it's going to be the end, but there's always at least
The tyrant was on the helicopter the whole time.
there's always like at least 2 or 3 cop outs in a way, and I mean that in the best way because I love that kind of way where it kind of puts you into a false sense of security, and then you look at the timeline of the movie and there's still 20 minutes to go and you're like, wait a second. Right, and same with the gaming. The game keeps going. You think, what? We didn't get any of that with this. We got exploded Whitlam, who, by the way, I think we praised that like little short story of his quite well, didn't we? I think I remember liking it.
It was certainly interesting. I think most of us liked it, and if we didn't, it was like, well, it stands out because it's interesting and different.
Yeah, and like that was a disservice to him, like this comic.
Blow him up.
Because he was. If you want to learn more about Whitlam, guys, go read the original volume, the original collection before this one, right? Because the Whitlam story is actually really cool, but then they just blow him up in this one.
Now, I don't want to be picky or angry or upset, but in this case, right, he injected himself with the G virus last time we saw him. Now, I know they quote-unquote cured him, and I know that Sherry's regenerative powers wouldn't be known to the public yet, but you'd have thought something would happen other than get split in half and die.
Yeah.
I
think it was forgotten.
Opportunity wasted. Yeah, they just used the name, didn't they? Evil Dr. Whitlam. I mean, he's aged 20 years in what appears to be a month. So,
I bet you they had this is how when bad writing like this is done, I expect there was like a list of names. You need to include this guy, he's evil, by the way. This guy, he's evil. This guy, good guy, good guy, good guy. These are just lists. They're like, now write a story. And by the way, these are the things we can mention in the story. Like, these are the things that Capcom has mentioned we can say.
So it's an AI-driven story before AI-driven stories were a thing.
I mean, AI was built by human brains. So...
We're getting to... go on, James.
I didn't like it. I didn't like this 4th story. It was bad. It didn't drag me back in. It was disappointing. Just like the past. The thing is, I say the past 2 issues, but the first one didn't feel like an issue of a comic. I just felt like I was reading a prologue.
For sure. Cool. You're hitting a lot of points with characters there, so that's nice because we're going to move on now to talk about the characters and about the writing in general. I guess we can sort of include this all in together, how we felt about any of the particular characters, because we haven't talked about them too much, and maybe that's because people don't feel like there wasn't a lot there. I'm not just saying that I disagree necessarily, but it's worth getting on them a little bit because there's some stuff, I suppose, like the bickering between some of the characters is basically like anything out of a military and sci-fi military film at the time. Like some of them, these two don't get along, so for some reason. So they argue, like that's immediate from issue 1. In issue 2, this character has a crush on someone, and they actually have a crush on someone else. Like everything else in the story goes absolutely nowhere. Especially because one of them dies. It's sort of related to that love triangle, so I guess we're meant to care more. But as you say, the tone was so all over the place. How could you care? But yeah, there is some stuff to get into with some of the characters and their backstory, if anyone has any particular notes about that. James, any notes on the characters and how they were written?
Quan looks like Gambit.
Yeah, 100%, yeah.
Yeah.
I could see a court case.
Like, legit, like, he could just get cards out and he'd be Gambit. Like, he looks... It's a cool character design, like, but Gambit's always been
there.
super cool. So
Gambit's already there. So
yeah, and this was created. The art was done by reading the back of it was done by somebody who did Superman. So this was also potentially a legal problem. Right. So yeah, that was very interesting. I think out of all of the characters, in terms to look at them. I think Quan Williamson was the most interesting to look at. Patrick was boring. Like literally, that guy did nothing. Like, you know, he's the guy that they said he just knows what Umbrella's up to whenever, right?
Yeah.
But he literally did nothing, and then for some reason Cardenas is like, "Oh, I really like him." Oh well, I guess I'll die.
I like boring men. You know what's funny about Patrick is that he's the guy who comes back, and I didn't expect him to do this, but he's the guy from the other comics that they brought back to join Stars. And you're right, he just like he does nothing. He's like barely serves a purpose whatsoever other than to get infected by the end.
Yeah, he gets tripped up by a penguin.
That's right. That's his claim to fame.
Yeah, and Falcon is, you know, as you said, Si, like Falcon is just the lead action hero.
He's a toy. He's an action figure.
Yeah, literally. It could be the leader of the Gorgonites, you know.
I mean, he didn't have much of a choice when his mother names him Falcon. Like, he's got one job he can go for, really.
Speaking of people... Oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say much more, to be honest. But, like, then there was the punk, you know.
Jesse, yeah.
And that was his name? Right.
I only know that because it's written in front of me.
Yeah, there was a bit where... I actually didn't peg, by the way, that he was a bad guy, right? So it was very... I think it's because at that point I've been treating it like it was dumb, right? So I wasn't really taking it seriously. So when it got to the point where Raquel's in the helicopter and turns to... Well, is on the radio to Falcon. By the way, I don't know how that conversation happened without Jesse hearing.
Yeah.
But yeah, Raquel turns to Falcon and says, "I think Jesse's double agent, bro." You know, because he just spilled half of the virus. You know, the antidote. You know, and I was like, "Wow, that's a huge leap." Like, he just came out of a war zone. I don't understand what's happening, you know. And then, it actually was true. And then he was like, it was me all along. I was trying, but you guys are so fast and so strong, and I want to kiss you all. You know?
Speaking of, you said about Falcon's mother, it's some of the other ones for me. Like, Rose's mother apparently dies in a story in the collected edition of comics. I looked this up. I don't know what that is, and I can't find it. We definitely didn't read a story about Rose's mother, did we? Cardenas?
No.
Is it not? Is it Emmy's Diner, or is it the Ibis Island knockoff one?
I'm not sure. I looked up the story name that it referenced, and I couldn't find it. And so maybe I'm being an idiot, but I was like, okay. But in terms of the backstories, though, you mentioned Jesse and Steve. This might have been what you were alluding to earlier. I'm not sure. It's either ironic or brilliant writing that Jesse's backstory, basically, he had the ultimatum between going away for life or whatever, or joining the Stars. And what's funny about that is that's exactly how Umbrella handle UBCS soldiers. They're like, you're on death row, so you're either going to die or you get to live and join. You have to join our private army. I was like, there's some irony that Stars are doing exactly the same thing in these comics that Umbrella are in, aren't they? Other than that, yeah, Quan, the most interesting character. I think design-wise, I sort of hate it because it is just Gambit. I'm like, really? I also hate it because, like, as I've alluded to at the beginning, immediately he says Sheila and Struth just to make sure you get it. He's wearing a hat as well. Just make sure, guys, whatever he's wearing is like big long brown coat. He's Australian, but he's the MVP of the whole thing. Everyone else kind of sucks, does nothing, gets in trouble. He like has to stand up and do stuff by himself. He winds up killing the main villain like easily, despite being a caricature. He's the one that has the most effect on the quote unquote story. Steve, how did you feel about the characters?
I mean, calling them characters also feels a bit
characters,
generous, really. Like they're archetypes, they're caricatures. Patrick Brady looks nothing like his original self, for example. Honestly, the more and more I look into this, the more and more it annoys me, because you look at the original Stars, and yes, they could be like considered a bit silly with their color-coded outfits, but they had like reasonable skills and talents to bring to a police unit, as opposed to I can sense G-Virus stuff. I'm good with machines. That's great, Donatello, by the way. Or what is it? Oh, I can track stuff. I have a big ray gun. I look like Sergeant Apone mixed with that guy from Halo whose name escapes me.
Sergeant Johnson.
Sergeant Johnson. And then, Hacker Kid, who's apparently lived through the film of War Games and decided to become... It's just dross, really. Like,
yeah.
I suppose comic book makes sense, but even the X-Men in the earliest iterations were very developed and nuanced characters eventually over the course of like a handful of issues. Not so much here. We've got Jesse, who's like, pretty much like letting slip at least once per comic about how he's going to backstab the team in some way or form. A very subtle wink, wink, nod. I really did not feel anything. And as for the villains, they were either some generic dude in a lab coat going, "You can't stop us," or Dexter Whitlam, who's gone from being, as aged up and now is also, "I have the X virus," mustache twirl. And I'm sorry that they're the blandest, most generic thing I think we've ever seen on the podcast.
Cool. Sherwin, any thoughts on the caricatures beyond that?
I mean, I feel it's quite comical you just call them caricatures.
That was intentional.
I appreciate that. I feel vindicated from what I said at the start of the episode. But I think this thing contains so many Chekhov's guns that it's like Chekhov's arsenal. Like, there's just so many completely like, this thing's happening. Oh, here's a thing, here's a thing, here's a thing. This character does this character does this. This is this. None of it comes to anywhere. It's like, considering all of the burden it has of how much how much work it's doing to try and tell a story, introduce a whole bunch of characters, create 3 different settings to what's going on, try and build a backstory of the X virus, the bad guys, the walrus, the penguin, all of these important questions that we need to know the answers to, and it is still, and its pacing is awful. And it's still wasting time with so many pointless bits of storytelling that you genuinely have to ask, and I do mean this with all due respect to the people who made it, I really do. Are you like 15? Like, is this, you've done your homework on the bus on the way to school or something? Because it's just bad. It's like, I genuinely struggle reading this to understand that these people were professionals in their industry. It's literally that bad in terms of like the dead ends, the pointless story details. It's like I can't think of anything, and anybody would have like employed these guys to actually write a story for anything. This actually does genuinely make some of the Resident Evil movies seem good.
So you loved it, yeah?
Well, Joe, the thing I kind of found with this is I did genuinely find myself at several stages while reading, thinking, would I rather be reading this or watching the Resident Evil stage show? And that was a tough question, but I do fondly look back to that period where we recorded the episode of the Resident Evil stage show, so I think I'd rather watch the stage show than read this.
It's a very good point, because at this point, I did have the header of BOWs, but I just can't be bothered to talk about it anymore. Like, I feel like we've run it into the ground a little bit. I'll go open the floor up to anyone that does have any notes on the monsters that we saw. We mentioned the liquor, which is there for like a panel, which is disappointing.
And just play Altered Beast,
or
stick a tyrant in it.
To go back exactly to what you guys were saying right at the beginning when we were talking about art style and how it just got lazier and lazier, is that final battle, for all of the compliments that I had about it being like, it's against your own teammates, they all look like Domo. They're just like brown shapes. They're just like... absolutely no actual design has gone into that.
It's interesting you're saying about the silhouettes, because this is where it really goes off. Like,
absolutely,
goes off. The silhouettes by this end, it's just like Play-Doh. It's just terrible.
Yeah. Any thoughts on BOWs? Feel free to chuck them in now. I was going to just leave it open.
I think I've said enough about them, to be honest.
Yeah, I think we covered them as we went.
Can we have a moment of appreciation for the penguin again? Because that was the best thing about this entire thing.
I have one more thing to add. It was the confused roar.
Confused roar?
When the helicopter came in, there was a roar?
With a question mark.
With a question mark for some reason, as if a monster could ask a question while it was roaring for some reason.
So, here's a question for you, right, James? What are monsters meant to be? Scary.
It is,
right? Meant to be terrifying. Were any of them ever in these comics at any point?
I mean, No.
What about fat penguin in the distance? It was scary in his own way.
I mean, yeah, like if you're looking at it that penguin was scary as heck. Like,
okay, I'm glad you. That does kind of look menacing, really.
When I saw it at first, I was like, "This looks like some kind of it." Do you know if anyone's seen the new D&D movie? It looked like I thought, "Oh, Themberchild is coming."
Mm-hmm.
You know, I thought the big fat dragon was coming. You know, but no, it was actually just an emperor penguin.
So,
and I'll throw in. Sorry, go on.
I'll go for it.
I was going to say, I'll throw in. I'm not sure the elephant on fire at the start was actually a zombie elephant. I think it might literally have just been an elephant they set on fire.
It is an elephant, yeah.
There is absolutely no reason to believe that it's infected, is it? The way it's drawn incredibly realistically as well, all things considered.
It's got the best bit of art in the game.
Yeah, it looks like a Mastodon artwork or something. Like, this is a heavy metal album cover waiting to happen. So basically what I'm saying is look for that in stores soon when I've finished writing it. That's going to be the artwork. So the final question I asked for the last time we did Comic Club, I'm going to ask again, which was after reading this, thinking about the context at the time, if you had read it when it came out, how would you have felt about it? Would you have wanted more of it? James, how would you have felt about this if you were a Resident Evil fan in 2000, considering the context of the games that had come out at this point? Would this have tickled your pickle?
Wow, that's a great question, because this came out just a year before Resident Evil the movie did.
Yes.
And I loved that movie. Like, when it first came out, I absolutely adored it, because I knew nothing about Resident Evil.
Yeah.
Right, and like it had Mila Jovovich in it, who I absolutely adore, and showed Rodriguez in it, who I love even more. Like, it had that cool, hallway scene, right? But this isn't a Resident Evil podcast. Go watch that one. Go listen to that one if you want to. But like, I did love that movie, so I think if I saw these comics, especially around,
that's fair.
Maybe if I was waiting a year. And maybe I watched... Okay, here's the scenario for you. I just watched the movie. Oh, I want more Resident Evil, but I don't really want to play the games because it's too scary and I'm only 15 years old. You know, so...
Hey, I spot this on a shelf.
Let me see if I can... I would definitely pick this up. I go, oh, Resident Evil comic. And it's not that big either. Yeah, I'd definitely pick it up. And I think I would enjoy it too. But I'm also 15 years old. And as Sherwin has said, it was written by 15-year-olds.
For 15-year-olds.
By 15-year-olds, for 15-year-olds. So, yeah, it definitely would have appeal to me, I think.
Steve, same question, really. Would you have, if you'd have read this at the time, how would you have felt about it?
I don't want to big up 14-year-old Steve, but I think he had at least a little bit of quality control about it. A little bit of nous. I don't think I would have liked it. Like, the same reasons it bugs me today are things that generally bug me about any media that does the same kind of thing. It's I don't think 14-year-old Steve's buying this. Like, he's a big Resident Evil fan, but he was always like, action figures maybe. It took a lot to get the novels back when I was at college, so. Probably not.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm kind of in agreement. I, like you, James, even though I was a Resident Evil fan, but I was also quite young, I enjoyed the movie. I was very aware of its flaws, but and how disconnected it was, and it was just kind of using iconography, but there are definitely aspects of it that I enjoyed. This feels like that, but really drilled down into nothing, where it's just like, we're using the word stars, and here's a liquor for a panel, and then a tyrant dies. I feel like, I'm like you, Steve, I hope I would have looked at this and gone, this has really got nothing to do with anything that I like about Resident Evil. Realistically, by issue 2, where you're fighting giant muscle-bound men with whale heads and walrus heads, we haven't gone in on that hard enough. A walrus man, I would have been like, yeah, what is this? Sherwin, for you, same question. How would you have felt at the time? Would you have enjoyed this at all? I'm pretty sure I know where this is going.
No. I mean, it's fairly obvious from what I said. I mean, I was a little bit older than you guys. Maybe not Steve, because you're as ancient as I am. But I would have mostly sat there and I've got more interesting things to do with life, like sleep. Or, just drink myself unconscious or whatever it was I was doing then. No, I can't honestly imagine that this would have been a good thing. No.
Completely fair. Okay, well, that is Resident Evil Fire and Ice. Just to point out, because it was kind of asked if this is followed on from, in terms of WildStorm's output, there's 2 more things to cover. The next, but both of them, one of them is Code Veronica, basically, but it's not even written, well, it is written by WildStorm, but the art isn't. It's the Chinese manhwa that was republished by WildStorm. And then there is just a series called Resident Evil, which was to tie into Resident Evil 5. So unless they also try and tie that into their previous comics, I very much doubt that these are connected in a way. I feel like this is the end of their own little stories that they were telling. But I guess time will tell when we do dig into those 2 more episodes of Comic Club. But nothing else remains for me but to thank our contributors, our patrons, and our listeners. Join the First Dates Break Discord server to become part of our community and hear the show early and unedited. And don't forget to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and more. All of these links and all of our content can be found at faspraypod.com. You can listen to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, and all good podcasting apps. And if you like what you hear, please do leave us a review where you can and spread the good word. Don't forget you can support the show by picking up some merch or at patreon.com/faspraypod for as little as $1 a month. On some more positive notes, in our next episode, we brave the wild anthology of Raccoon City as we finally cover the fan favourite spin-off game. It's a highly requested episode indeed. It's Resident Evil Outbreak. Thank you to the panel. You can follow all the Pueblo people individually. I'm at Syniac_123. Steve at FB Steve was taken. James is at Moist Owlet OFF, and Sherwin is at Sherwin's Agenda. And finally, thank you for listening and have a good week. First Zelda game I ever played, the original Link's Awakening. I had no idea what was going on. Great game, though.
You had a green hat and you killed things with a sword.
I didn't have a green hat. It was on the Game Boy. I had a grey hat.
No, you definitely had a green hat if it was on the Game Boy. If it was the original one, everything was green. It's just green on green violence everywhere.
Green on green violence, yes.
So that is the First Stage Break server in a nutshell, with the amount of people with green in their name. Green on green violence.
Yeah, when we start talking about food, it's green on green violence.
Yeah, 100%.